Yes, I do.
There's a lot we have to talk about. There was you may have heard, one of our youth was at a school board meeting this summer, and she's just 13 years old, and she just spoke, when it was her turn to speak, she just spoke on behalf of the school, hoping that the school would support its, the gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual students. And apparently the adults were so vicious and aggressive toward her after she spoke, and I should say adults all wearing red, white, and blue, that the police said, we want to escort you to your car at the end of the thing because we don't want you to be harassed by these adults. So it's in this context that I want to talk to you about risking freedom and about freedom of speech. And but speaking of freedom, there's a story about a Russian and an American who are having this debate about freedom of speech. And the American's kind of bragging about our system. He says, I can go with a big sign yelling right up to the White House and say that President Biden is corrupt and needs to go. And the Russian says, well, that's not that big a deal. It's the same in my country. I can go right up to the Kremlin with a sign yelling, President Biden is corrupt and he must go. And nothing happens to me either. But it's a little different in Saudi Arabia, where they say free speech isn't really free. It costs an arm and a leg. Literally. Is there a cause that you would risk dying for? Are there any people that you'd give your life to protect? Maybe your own family members, maybe a child, maybe a elderly person being harmed in the streets. I can't help but think of all those who've given their lives, their well-being, to try to defend the freedoms of this country, the freedoms that we take so dear, to have a humanist-related service in a place like Oklahoma, to a place where we can ask any questions and question any answers. Hopefully none of us will ever have to die for our freedoms, as scores of Ukrainians are having to do every day right now. But let's remember that there are about 1.5 million active U.S. military and about 1 million reservists who all are signed up, volunteering to be willing, if necessary, to die for our freedoms and the rights that we hold so dear. Now, there are thousands of security officers and police and others who carry guns and are willing to put their lives in harm's way any day so that people like me don't have to carry a gun. So that if I see something bad happening, I can call them to come deal with it, so hopefully I don't have to. Is there anything you would be willing to die for? Now, as you know, Salman Rushdie, who I mentioned has spoken twice here recently, was violently attacked last week while delivering a talk not unlike things that he said when he was here. He's been living under the threat of assassination since 1989 for a novel that he wrote, that albeit a work of satiric fantasy fiction, it was considered for many Muslims to be blasphemy against the Muslim holy book, the Quran. For that, the Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme religious and political leader of Iran, put a fatwa, an order of assassination, out on his life and offered a bounty of $3 million for anyone who would kill him. Rushdie lived in hiding for a decade before he finally decided to come out and just live his life. But he never knew, he said in an interview, I never knew if it would be a waiter in a restaurant where I was eating, or somebody walking down the street who might decide that they'd be the one to place a dagger in his heart or a bullet in his head. For what? For writing a novel, for questioning some religious truths. Now, I can recall when I was in seminary back in the 90s, my friend Lori asked me if I would help her to move a desk from an office building in the city into her home. And I said, sure. And so we parked right behind this alley where the office was, where we're going to come haul this desk down. It was a somewhat rougher neighborhood in Boston than where we went to seminary. And Lori and I proceeded to walk up through the alley to get to where we were going. And I noticed there were 3 20-something white guys just kind of hanging out in the alley, fooling around. And I felt my heart pounding. And I remember my whole body just suddenly started to feel weak. It was because my friend Lori was noticeably transgender. Back then, her typical outfit included long strawberry blonde hair, combat boots, a shirt and tie, and a beard. Now here I was walking side by side through an alley in a fairly desolate part of Boston with someone whose appearance could definitely cause us to be harassed or worse. And I'll be honest, I became really scared. Like I have only been a few times in my life. I felt so incredibly vulnerable to the prejudices and fears and bravado of these young men in front of us. What did they learn in church? Who did they follow on the internet? Would they push us around? Would they beat us up? Would they call us names? Or hopefully just ignore us? All these thoughts were running through my mind as we approached them. And it hit me that Lori must feel this way all the time, just walking through the world, being herself. It was important for me that I had that experience. Unfortunately, they ignored us. They didn't help us with the desk, which would have been nice too. But would you risk dying or harassment to be true to yourself, as my friend Lori does? Did you know that some years during our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were more trans people murdered in America than died in the wars? And that doesn't account for the many suicides and attempted suicides of trans people, which in some years, for those under 25 has been 40% or higher. What would you die for? Anything? Anyone? No, it's a tragic truth that our transgender siblings, in effect, have to be willing to die or be harassed just to be free to be themselves. Freedom of expression. Be it literary, like in the case of Salman Rushdie, or personal, in the case of a person whose gender does not fit neatly into the cultural binary. Freedom of expression. It is a core liberty written into the Declaration of Independence and enshrined in our Constitution. It says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, given to all human beings by their Creator, that all people are created equal, and have the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, it's worth noting that according to our founding documents, these are not rights that are given by the government or by the laws. It says they were given by our Creator. They are given to us at birth, and that the government is here only to protect them if they're ever encroached upon. Equality, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness for all people. Now, despite anyone's misgivings about the history of our country, and there's plenty to be upset about, it is a profound and remarkable fact that we live in a country, at least right now, that's premised on the supposition of such equality and liberty for all. Now, we're still trying to figure out how to live into it and live up to it, but the fact that we live in such a nation is not to be taken lightly, especially in light of some things that are going on. So I've come to the problem that I wanted to speak to you about this morning. It's bad enough when the supreme leader of a theocracy in Iran puts a target on the back of a novelist. But when our own citizens and politicians use language that puts a target on the backs of FBI agents, IRS agents, the vice president, poll watchers, Capitol police officers, school board members, transgender people, 13-year-old girls at the school board, that needs to be called out by preachers, politicians, and people of all walks of life. Are you with me with that? Now, I understand, people say, but, you're speaking in a church this morning, Marlin. This isn't just a political rally. And so how is this our struggle at All Souls? People will ask. Is it really religious, or is this just a political talk this morning? Now, as I told the children a little while earlier, when Unitarian Universalists, the tradition from which All Souls comes, when we have always looked for where is the good, or for the theistic, where is God in history, we have always been able to point faithfully towards those who were struggling for freedom. Over and over again. Slaves struggling for freedom. Religious people struggling for freedom. Scientists struggling for freedom. Authors struggling for freedom. Our tradition, in the theological sense, is called, we have what's called, by theologians, a hermeneutic of freedom. So that's a big word you can take to Scrabble or wherever. The hermeneutic, right? It's how do we interpret the world? How do we interpret our values? Where do they come from? It's called a hermeneutic, in our tradition, of freedom. We find the good consistently in those looking for and searching for freedom in history and in time. So, don't get me wrong. This has been the tradition of Unitarian Universalists throughout time, but there's notable exceptions. And there have been internal squabbles and fights within our communities about these issues from the beginning, and they still exist today, even in here. But those who have lifted the banner of this tradition through history in the most enduring ways, they have done this not as a political or legal issue, but as a core calling of their moral conscience. And from that sense of inalienable rights that belong to every person by virtue of their birth. Now, if you heard my message last Sunday, if you were here last Sunday, you know that I have been on a deep spiritual and serious spiritual path, influenced by Buddhism and Eastern traditions, and I am really looking forward this year to sharing that journey with you and sharing my learnings and things that I think will help us to stay grounded in the midst of everything that's going on, will help us to rise to the best angels of our nature, if you will. So that's really what I want to be up here talking about week in and week out. But occasionally, like this morning, I will offer a message with moral clarity that will have implications that are political. But hear this. These issues may play out in the political realm, but what's at stake is beyond anything that a government or laws have the right to give or take away. These are issues of human dignity that transcend politics. These are inalienable rights. And even though they must play out in the political realm, there's something much larger than politics. For those school boards trying to ban books, have you been reading about this? It's insane what's going on. And those legislatures, like here in Oklahoma, trying to sanitize history so that nobody feels uncomfortable. What history are you going to tell? Slavery? The treatment of Native Americans, the race massacre of 1921. Like, how do you tell your history and nobody, I hope you feel uncomfortable. I want my kids to feel uncomfortable about some of these things because that's how we grow and that's how we change. It's ridiculous what they're doing. And smart, wise, thoughtful, caring people need to stand up and say, no, not in our home, not in our school, not in our state. There's battles over bathroom bills and battles over sports, and they're passing laws to limit the rights of a woman over her own body. From this congregation's pulpit, from this congregation's microphone, we will call this out for what it is. Because there is no way that we're going to just stand by and lose the freedoms that have been given to us at birth and enshrined in our Constitution and are the very center of what this nation stands for. Now, thank you. I'm glad you're with me, and I hope I don't lose some of you here, but I may. This is not a partisan issue because, quite frankly, and again, you may not agree with everything I have to say about this, but the extreme progressive left in recent years has also been denying the freedom of speech at times on university campuses, comedy clubs, and other places. And I believe it is their own heartfelt but misguided attempt at creating a version of earthly perfection. And freedom of speech is too important. So it may not be popular sometimes, but I'm going to call it out from whichever side it comes. If we're canceling comedians or others who are trying to peacefully express with integrity their beliefs, even if we disagree with them. As Salman Rushdie has said, you must be willing to defend material that you personally detest, because of course it's no trick to defend the speech of people you either agree with or who don't particularly upset you. It's when people really upset you that you discover if you believe in free speech. I'll never forget the words of a 70-year-old woman a few years ago from this congregation who said to me, Marlin, I don't agree with everything you say from the pulpit or the other ministers, but I would take a bullet to ensure that you have the freedom to say it. May our days upon this earth, short as they may they be filled with peace. And may violence in the name of politics and religion or anything else be anathema to us. Today, though, if we want to keep our freedoms, it means voting, it means protesting, it means showing up at school board meetings and city council meetings and running for public office. Because if we don't win and preserve our freedoms in the political battlefield, it could become something we have to, once again, give our lives for, or our children, or our grandchildren. So let's fight this battle now for them and for ourselves, because it's precious what we have in this country, and it would be a shame to lose it. But if good people don't stand up and do the hard work of democracy, that's what seems like it could easily slip away. So may we be a people May this be a congregation that forever is dedicated to freedom in the best, if not unrealized, tradition of America. Thank you. I want to say one thing, because I've noticed this. When I speak, especially when I speak on issues of transgender or something like that, that sometimes people can think like, oh, maybe I'm not, open-minded enough to be a part of All Souls or something like that. Or they say, I have some real questions about some of this stuff, but I don't know if I should open my mouth, at All Souls or something, because I'm afraid that if I ask my questions, someone will think I'm a bad person or something like that. And so I really want to let everybody know, in the interest of free speech, of course, and just that especially our ministers, Randy, Barbara, myself, all Corey's level, we're always open to talking about anything. We every question is a valid question. If you're asking it, it's because it's coming from your own heart. You're trying to figure it out. With all the changes, particularly around gender, it is confusing. I've got grandparents coming to me saying, like, I'm just trying to figure out, my grandchild just told me that they were transgender or non-binary, and they're just trying to figure it out. And I just want you to know we're a safe space to have those conversations, non-judgmental, and really we want to. And in fact, I want to encourage you to come speak to one of us privately, rather than like go into a big room of people and just blurt out, like, well, what about, because sometimes that can be hurtful to some of the people in the room, and then they'll, maybe lash out, then you feel hurt, then everybody's like, oh, God, that was an awful experience. And so it's sometimes better to just have those conversations in smaller groups of people, but there's questions, people all of a sudden about sports, about this, about that. So please, just know that we know that if you're coming forward with a genuine question in your heart, we're not judging you, and we really want to be in conversation, because that's how we learn and grow together. And, in the end, like I told my story about my friend Lori, and shared some of those statistics, it's not easy to be transgender in our world right now. So anything we can do to create allies and support for our young people and people of all ages, that'd be great. Thank you.